The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, a small frontier town that most travelers passed through without a second glance. Samuel Hayes stood behind the wooden counter of his general store, carefully arranging canned goods on the shelves. His weathered hands moved with quiet precision, each motion deliberate and practiced. To anyone watching, he appeared to be nothing more than a middle-aged shopkeeper going about his daily routine. Samuel had owned Hayes General Store for nearly 8 years now, ever since he had drifted into Copper Ridge with little more than the clothes on his back and a worn leather satchel. The townspeople had grown accustomed to his quiet manner and helpful nature. He never spoke much about his past, and folks respected that privacy. In a place where many people came to start fresh, asking too many questions was considered poor manners. The bell above the door chimed softly as Mrs. Henderson entered, her basket clutched tightly in her hands. She was the banker's wife, a nervous woman who always seemed to expect trouble around every corner. Samuel nodded politely as she approached the counter. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. What can I help you with today?" "Oh, Samuel, I'm so worried," she began, wringing her hands. "My husband heard talk at the saloon last night. There's word that the Dalton gang might be heading this way. You know how they've been terrorizing towns all across the territory." Samuel continued stacking cans, his expression unchanged. "I wouldn't worry too much about rumors, ma'am. Most of that saloon talk is just men trying to sound important." Mrs. Henderson leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But what if it's true? What if they come here? We don't have a sheriff anymore. Not since Sheriff Thompson moved on to Dodge City. There's nobody to protect us." Samuel paused in his work and looked at her with kind eyes. "Mrs. Henderson, every town faces troubles from time to time. But Copper Ridge has good people, and good people find ways to take care of themselves when they need to." She didn't seem convinced, but she gathered the supplies she needed and left with a worried expression. Samuel watched her hurry down the street, then returned to his work. He had heard the same rumors she mentioned, but unlike Mrs. Henderson, he wasn't afraid. He had good reasons for his calm confidence, reasons that the people of Copper Ridge knew nothing about. As the day progressed, more customers came and went, and many brought similar concerns about the Dalton gang. The Daltons were known throughout the territory as ruthless outlaws who took what they wanted and left destruction in their wake. They had robbed banks, trains, and stores across 3 states, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law. Samuel listened to each worried customer with patience, offering reassurance where he could. He noticed that some of the men in town were talking about forming a citizens' militia, though most of them had never fired a gun in anger. Their hearts were in the right place, but Samuel knew that good intentions weren't always enough when facing real danger. Late in the afternoon, young Tommy Fletcher burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement and fear. Tommy was barely 16, all legs and enthusiasm, and he worked part-time helping Samuel with deliveries. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, I just came from the telegraph office. Mr. Patterson got a message from the sheriff in Millerville. The Dalton gang hit the bank there yesterday morning. They killed 2 people and stole everything in the vault. They're heading west, and Millerville is only 2 days' ride from here." Samuel set down the inventory sheet he had been reviewing and gave Tommy his full attention. "Take a breath, son. Now, what exactly did the message say?" Tommy gulped and tried to calm down. "It said the gang has 6 men led by Jake Dalton himself. They're armed with the latest rifles and they're riding hard. The sheriff thinks they might hit Copper Ridge or Pine Valley next, since both towns are on the westward trail." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Did Mr. Patterson send word to the territorial marshal's office?" "Yes, sir, but the nearest marshal is 3 days away, maybe 4 with the spring rains making the roads muddy. Even if he started riding the moment he got the message, he won't be here in time." After Tommy left to spread the news to other shopkeepers, Samuel stood alone in his store, thinking. He walked to the front window and looked out at the street where people were gathering in small groups, their voices carrying worry and uncertainty. These were good people who had welcomed him into their community, who had trusted him with their business and friendship. They didn't deserve to live in fear. Samuel locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. He walked to the back of the store, to a small room where he kept his personal belongings. From beneath a loose floorboard, he pulled out a long wooden box that hadn't been opened in years. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a pair of Colt .45 revolvers with pearl handles. The metal gleamed despite the years of storage, and the weapons felt familiar and comfortable in his hands. He had hoped never to touch these guns again. When he came to Copper Ridge, he had made a promise to himself that Samuel Hayes, the shopkeeper, would be a peaceful man, different from the person he had been before. But sometimes a man's past skills were needed to protect his future. Samuel spent the evening cleaning and checking the revolvers, his movements sure and practiced. Muscle memory returned as he spun the cylinders and tested the action. These weren't just any guns. They were custom-made, perfectly balanced, and had been crafted by a master gunsmith who understood that sometimes a man's life depended on fractions of a second. As darkness fell over Copper Ridge, Samuel Hayes made his preparations. The townspeople were boarding up their windows and hiding their valuables, hoping that the storm would pass them by. But Samuel knew better than most that some storms had to be faced head-on. The Dalton gang was coming, and when they arrived, they would discover that the quiet shopkeeper was not the easy target they expected. The next morning brought heavy clouds and an unsettling quiet to Copper Ridge. Samuel opened his store as usual, but the street outside remained nearly empty. Most of the townspeople were staying indoors, waiting to see if the rumors about the Dalton gang would prove true. The few who did venture out moved quickly and kept their eyes down, as if looking around too much might invite trouble. Samuel arranged his shelves and swept the floor, maintaining his normal routine despite the tension in the air. He had learned long ago that keeping busy helped steady the nerves before trouble arrived. His customers who did stop by spoke in hushed voices and seemed eager to finish their business and get back to the safety of their homes. Around midday, Doc Morrison came by for his usual weekly supplies. The town's physician was a steady man in his 60s who had seen enough of life to remain calm in most situations. He noticed Samuel's composed demeanor and studied him with curious eyes. "You don't seem too worried about these outlaw rumors, Samuel," Doc Morrison observed as he gathered medical supplies. "Most folks in town are scared half to death." Samuel continued counting change without looking up. "Worrying about things that might happen never struck me as very useful, Doc. Better to prepare for what you can control and deal with the rest when it comes." Doc Morrison nodded slowly. "That's practical thinking. Though I have to say, there's something about your calm that reminds me of soldiers I knew during the war, men who had seen real trouble and knew how to handle themselves." Samuel finally looked up, meeting the doctor's gaze. "Every man has his own way of dealing with uncertainty, I suppose." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats thundering down the main street. Through the window, they could see young Billy Crawford riding hard toward the center of town, his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up in front of the saloon and began shouting, "They're coming! The Dalton gang is coming. I saw them myself, maybe 5 miles out." 6 riders armed to the teeth heading straight for town. The news spread like wildfire. People began running in all directions, some heading for their homes, others gathering in the street to hear more details. Samuel and Doc Morrison stepped outside to listen as Billy, still catching his breath, told his story. "I was checking the fence line on my Piaz North pasture when I saw dust on the horizon. Thought it might be a cattle drive, so I rode up to the ridge to get a better look. It was them, all right. Jake Dalton himself was in the lead. I recognized him from the wanted posters. They'll be here within the hour." Mayor Carlson, a portly man who owned the hardware store, pushed through the crowd. "Did they see you, Billy?" "No, sir. I stayed low and rode back the long way through the creek bed." "They don't know I spotted them." The mayor turned to address the growing crowd. "All right, everyone, stay calm. We need to think this through. Most of you should get inside and stay there until this is over. Close your shutters and keep your heads down." "What about our money?" called out Mr. Henderson from the bank. "What about our businesses?" "Money can be replaced," Mayor Carlson replied grimly. "Lives cannot. These men are killers. Our best chance is to give them what they want and hope they move on quickly." Samuel listened to the discussion but said nothing. He understood the mayor's reasoning, but he also knew it was flawed. Men like the Dalton gang didn't just take money and leave. They took everything they wanted, and if they met no resistance in Copper Ridge, they would remember that weakness. They would return again and again until there was nothing left to take. As the crowd began to disperse, Samuel caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Standing near the church trying to comfort a group of frightened children was Sarah Mitchell, the schoolteacher. She was a kind young woman who had arrived in town just 6 months ago, full of hope and determination to educate the frontier children. Samuel had grown fond of her gentle manner and quiet strength, though he had never spoken of his feelings. The children clustered around Miss Mitchell were crying, confused by the fear they saw in the adults around them. She was doing her best to calm them, but Samuel could see the worry in her eyes. At that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. Samuel returned to his store and went to the back room where his guns waited. He strapped on the leather holsters, feeling their familiar weight around his waist. The pearl-handled Colts settled into place as if they had never been away. He checked his ammunition one final time, then walked to the mirror hanging on the wall. The man looking back at him was different from the quiet shopkeeper who had been there that morning. His eyes held a hardness that came from years of dangerous living, and his posture carried the confidence of someone who had faced death many times and survived. Samuel Hayes, the peaceful merchant, was still there, but now he stood alongside someone much more dangerous. He heard the sound of approaching horses and stepped to the front window. 6 riders were moving down the main street at a walking pace, their eyes scanning the buildings on both sides. They looked exactly like what they were, dangerous men who took what they wanted through violence and intimidation. Jake Dalton rode at the front of the group, a tall man with cold eyes and a week's worth of stubble on his face. His hand rested casually on the grip of his pistol, and he surveyed the town like a predator examining potential prey. The 5 men with him looked just as mean and capable, their weapons clearly visible and well-maintained. The outlaws stopped in front of the bank, but their attention was drawn to the general store where Samuel stood visible in the doorway. Jake Dalton's eyes locked onto Samuel's, and for a moment the 2 men studied each other across the dusty street. Samuel stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. To most observers, he appeared calm and unafraid, but anyone with experience in such matters would have noticed the way his fingers positioned themselves near his gun butts, ready to draw at a moment's notice. Jake Dalton urged his horse forward until he was directly in front of Samuel. "You the man who runs this store?" he asked, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of someone accustomed to being feared. "I am," Samuel replied simply. "Good. We'll be needing supplies, food, ammunition, and whatever money you've got in that cash box of yours. You going to give us any trouble?" Samuel looked up at the outlaw leader without flinching. "That depends on what kind of trouble you're planning to cause." The answer seemed to amuse Jake Dalton, who chuckled and glanced back at his men. "Hear that, boys? The shopkeeper wants to know what kind of trouble we're planning." He turned back to Samuel with a cold smile, "The kind where smart men do what we tell them and live to see another day." Samuel stood perfectly still as Jake Dalton dismounted and walked toward him, spurs jingling with each step. The other 5 outlaws remained on horseback, forming a semicircle that blocked any escape route. Their hands rested on their weapons, ready to draw at the first sign of resistance. "You know who I am?" Dalton asked, stopping just a few feet away from Samuel. "I've heard the name Jake Dalton mentioned around town," Samuel replied calmly. "Can't say I'm impressed by what I've heard." The outlaw's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You got a smart mouth for a man standing alone against 6 guns. Maybe you don't understand your situation here." "I understand it perfectly," Samuel said. 6 men rode into my town thinking they could take whatever they wanted. The question is whether you understand yours." One of the mounted outlaws, a thin man with a scar running down his left cheek, laughed harshly. "Jake, this fool thinks he's some kind of gunfighter. Want me to put him down now?" Dalton held up a hand to stop his man. "Easy, Scar. I'm curious about our brave shopkeeper here." He stepped closer to Samuel, close enough that Samuel could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the cruelty in his pale blue eyes. "See, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can usually tell what kind of man I'm dealing with right away. Farmers cry and beg. Merchants try to bargain. Cowards run and hide." Samuel said nothing, waiting. "But you," Dalton continued, "you're standing there like you think you got a chance. That tells me you're either the bravest fool I ever met, or there's something about you that doesn't match what I'm seeing. Maybe you should trust your first impression," Samuel suggested quietly. The exchange was interrupted by a commotion from across the street. Mayor Carlson was hurrying toward them, flanked by several other townsmen including Doc Morrison and Mr. Henderson from the bank. They approached cautiously, hands visible and empty of weapons. "Mr. Dalton," Mayor Carlson called out, slightly out of breath from his hurried walk. "I'm the mayor of Copper Ridge. I'm hoping we can resolve this situation peacefully." Dalton turned his attention to the newcomers but kept Samuel in his peripheral vision. Well, now we're getting somewhere. You got something to offer me, Mayor? The bank has about $3,000 in the vault, Carlson said. You can have it all, plus whatever supplies you need from any of our businesses. All we ask is that you take what you want and leave us in peace. 3,000, huh? Dalton scratched his stubble thoughtfully. That's not bad for a small town like this. But see, I got expenses. Got to pay my boys, buy ammunition, keep our horses fed. 3,000 don't go as far as it used to. It's all we have, Henderson said nervously. The town's been struggling with the dry weather affecting the crops. Dalton's smile was cold and calculating. Well then, I guess we'll just have to be creative about making up the difference. His gaze swept over the gathered townsmen. Nice watch you got there, Doc. And that's a pretty ring on your finger, Henderson. I bet your wives got some nice jewelry tucked away at home, too. Doc Morrison stepped forward. Now see here. We're trying to cooperate, but nothing, Dalton snapped. You'll give me what I want when I want it and be grateful I don't burn this whole town to the ground for good measure. Samuel had heard enough. I think you gentlemen should go back to your homes now, he said calmly to the townsmen. This isn't your fight anymore. Mayor Carlson looked confused. Samuel, what are you talking about? We're trying to negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate, Samuel said, his eyes never leaving Dalton. These men came here to rob and terrorize innocent people. The only question now is whether they're going to leave peacefully or be carried out. The outlaws erupted in laughter. Even Dalton seemed genuinely amused. Did you hear that, boys? The shopkeeper thinks he's going to carry us out. All by himself, no less. Samuel, please, Doc Morrison urged. Don't make this worse than it has to be. But Samuel was no longer listening to the townsmen. His attention was focused entirely on the 6 outlaws who had come to his town with violence and greed in their hearts. He had tried to live quietly to put his past behind him, but some situations couldn't be avoided. Last chance, Samuel said to Dalton. Get back on your horses and ride out of here. Don't come back. Dalton's amusement faded, replaced by cold anger. You threatening me? I'm giving you good advice. Whether you take it or not is up to you. The outlaw leader's hand moved toward his gun. I think it's time someone taught you some manners. Jake, one of his men, called out. Something ain't right here. Look at how he's standing. Look at his eyes. I seen that look before on men who knew how to use their guns. Dalton paused, studying Samuel more carefully. Now that he was looking for it, he could see what his man meant. Samuel's stance was perfectly balanced. His hands positioned exactly where they needed to be for a fast draw. His breathing was steady and controlled, showing no sign of fear or nervousness. Most telling of all were his eyes, which held the cold, calculating look of a professional gunfighter. Well, well, Dalton said slowly. Maybe our quiet shopkeeper has been keeping secrets. You got a name you used before you came to this town. Samuel considered the question. He had hoped never to use that name again, but circumstances were forcing his hand. Some people used to call me Samuel Hayes, he said. But back then most folks knew me as Lightning Sam. The effect was immediate and dramatic. 3 of the mounted outlaws exchanged worried glances, and one of them whispered something under his breath. Even Dalton's confident demeanor wavered slightly. Lightning Sam Hayes, he repeated slowly. I heard that name before. Story goes you once outdrew 3 men in Tombstone, killed all of them before any could clear leather. Stories get exaggerated over time, Samuel replied. It was only 2 men and one of them was drunk. Doc Morrison stared at Samuel in shock. Samuel, is this true? Go home, Doc, Samuel said gently without taking his eyes off the outlaws. All of you get off the street and stay inside until this is over. Mayor Carlson started to protest, but Doc Morrison grabbed his arm. Come on. If what I think is about to happen happens, we don't want to be caught in the crossfire. The townsmen reluctantly retreated, leaving Samuel facing the 6 outlaws alone in the dusty street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, and a hot wind stirred up small dust devils that danced across the ground. Dalton's hand hovered near his gun as he weighed his options. Lightning Sam Hayes was supposed to be dead, killed in a gunfight in El Paso 5 years ago. But if this really was the same man, then Dalton and his gang were facing one of the fastest guns that had ever lived. The silence stretched between Samuel and the 6 outlaws like a taut rope ready to snap. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as both sides measured each other, calculating odds and looking for advantages. Jake Dalton's confidence had evaporated, replaced by the cold realization that he might have bitten off more than he could chew. Lightning Sam Hayes, Dalton repeated, as if saying the name might help him figure out what to do next. Word was you got killed down in El Paso. I let people think that, Samuel said simply. Sometimes a man needs to disappear from his old life to find a new one. One of the mounted outlaws, a heavy-set man with graying hair, spoke up nervously. Jake, maybe we should reconsider this. If this really is Lightning Sam, we're talking about a man who faced down the Morrison brothers and lived. Hell, I heard he once killed 4 men in a single gunfight. 3 men, Samuel corrected mildly, and only because they gave me no choice. Dalton's jaw tightened. He had built his reputation on being the fastest gun in his gang, the man other outlaws feared and respected. But Lightning Sam Hayes was a legend, spoken of in hushed tones around campfires and saloons throughout the territory. If he backed down now in front of his men, his leadership would be finished. I don't care if you're Wild Bill Hickok himself, Dalton snarled, though his voice carried less conviction than before. 6 guns beat 1 no matter how fast you think you are. Samuel's expression didn't change. You might be right. But the question is, which one of you wants to be the first to find out? The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Samuel could see the doubt creeping into the faces of Dalton's men. They had signed up to rob defenseless towns and terrorize unarmed citizens, not to face a legendary gunfighter in a fair fight. The outlaw with the scar was fidgeting in his saddle, while the heavy-set man kept glancing toward the edge of town as if calculating escape routes. But Dalton had gone too far to back down now. His pride in his position as leader demanded that he see this through regardless of the cost. Boys, when I give the word, we all draw together. Don't matter how fast he is, he can't get all of us. Samuel knew the moment of truth had arrived. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but some situations couldn't be resolved with words. As the outlaws tensed for action, Samuel's mind slipped into the cold, focused state that had kept him alive through countless gunfights. Time seemed to slow down and every detail became crystal clear. He could see the sweat beating on Dalton's forehead, the nervous twitch in the scarred man's eye, the way the youngest outlaw was gripping his reins too tightly. Samuel's hands hung loose at his sides, but every muscle in his body was coiled and ready. This was what he had been born to do, what he had tried so hard to leave behind. Now, Dalton shouted, his hand diving for his gun. What happened next would be talked about in Copper Ridge for generations to come. Samuel's draw was so fast it seemed impossible, his hands moving in a blur that defied the eye's ability to follow. The pearl-handled Colts appeared in his hands as if by magic, flame erupting from their barrels before any of the outlaws had cleared leather. Dalton was the first to fall, Samuel's bullet taking him in the chest before his own gun was halfway out of its holster. The scarred outlaw managed to draw his weapon but never got the chance to fire it, Samuel's second shot spinning him out of his saddle. The heavy-set man tried to wheel his horse around to flee, but Samuel's third shot dropped him before he could escape. The youngest outlaw, panicking, fired wild and high, his bullet splintering the wooden sign above Samuel's head. Samuel's return shot was precise and final. The remaining 2 outlaws, seeing their companions fall like wheat before a scythe, threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. "Don't shoot," one of them cried. "We give up. We surrender." The entire gunfight had lasted less than 10 seconds. 4 men lay dead in the dusty street, while 2 others sat on their horses with their hands raised, faces pale with shock and fear. Samuel stood exactly where he had been before the shooting started, smoke curling from the barrels of his guns. The sound of the gunshots had brought people running from their hiding places. Windows and doors opened cautiously as townspeople peered out to see what had happened. Mayor Carlson was the first to venture into the street, followed closely by Doc Morrison and several others. "My God," the mayor whispered, staring at the scene in disbelief. "Samuel, what have you done?" "What needed doing?" Samuel replied, carefully reloading his weapons. "These 2 are going to ride out of town now and never come back." "Isn't that right, boys?" The surviving outlaws nodded frantically. "Yes, sir, Lightning Sam, we're riding out right now. You'll never see us again, we swear it." Samuel holstered his guns and looked at the 2 men. "Take their bodies with you, bury them somewhere far from here, and spread the word that Copper Ridge is under my protection. Anyone who comes here looking for trouble will find more than they bargained for." The outlaws quickly loaded their dead companions onto spare horses, working with desperate efficiency. Within minutes, they were riding hard out of town, leaving only dust and bloodstains as evidence of what had transpired. Doc Morrison approached Samuel cautiously. "Are you hurt?" Samuel shook his head, checking himself for wounds. The outlaws had been so shocked by his speed that their shots had gone wide. "I'm fine, Doc." A crowd was gathering now, townspeople emerging from their homes and businesses to see the aftermath of the gunfight. Samuel could see the mixture of awe, gratitude, and fear in their faces. They were looking at him differently now, no longer seeing the quiet shopkeeper but the legendary gunfighter he had once been. Sarah Mitchell appeared at the edge of the crowd, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Samuel's heart ached when he saw the fear in her eyes. This was exactly what he had hoped to avoid by hiding his past. The gentle schoolteacher who had smiled at him across the street just that morning was now looking at him like he was a stranger, a dangerous man she had never really known. Mayor Carlson stepped forward, still shaking from what he had witnessed. "Samuel, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been here, they would have robbed us blind and probably killed some of us too." "I did what anyone would have done," Samuel said quietly, though he knew that wasn't true. What he had done required skills that few men possessed and fewer still could execute under pressure. "No," the mayor insisted. "What you did was save this town. You're a hero, Samuel. A genuine hero." Samuel looked around at the faces staring at him with newfound respect and admiration. He should have felt proud, satisfied that he had protected these good people from harm. Instead, he felt empty and tired. The life he had built as a peaceful shopkeeper was over, shattered by the necessity of violence. The secret he had guarded so carefully was out now. Word would spread, as it always did on the frontier. Other gunfighters would come to challenge Lightning Sam Hayes, to test their speed against his legend. The quiet life he had cherished was gone forever, replaced by the dangerous existence he had tried so hard to escape. 3 days after the gunfight, life in Copper Ridge had taken on a strange new rhythm. The bloodstains had been scrubbed from the main street, but the memory of what had happened lingered in every conversation and sideways glance. Samuel continued to run his store, but everything had changed in ways both visible and subtle. Where once customers had chatted comfortably about weather and crops, now they spoke in respectful, almost reverent tones. Children who had once run freely through his store now hung back behind their parents, staring with wide eyes at the man who had faced 6 outlaws and lived. Samuel tried to maintain his friendly demeanor, but he could feel the distance growing between himself and the community he had come to love. The worst part was watching Sarah Mitchell. She still brought her students to the store for supplies, but she no longer met his eyes, or lingered to chat about books as she used to. When he tried to speak to her, she answered politely but briefly, then hurried away with her purchases. The easy warmth that had been building between them was gone, replaced by a careful politeness that hurt more than anger would have. Mayor Carlson visited the store frequently, ostensibly to check on Samuel, but really to bask in the reflected glory of having a famous gunfighter as a citizen. He brought visitors from neighboring towns, introducing Samuel with obvious pride and encouraging them to share stories they had heard about Lightning Sam. "Hayes, tell them about the time you faced down Black Pete, Morrison and Abilene," the mayor would urge, while Samuel stood behind his counter wishing he could disappear. Samuel tried to deflect these requests, but the visitors were persistent. Word had spread quickly throughout the territory that Lightning Sam Hayes was alive and living in Copper Ridge. The tiny town that had once been a peaceful stop for travelers was becoming a destination for curious thrill-seekers and fame hunters. On the 4th morning after the gunfight, Samuel was arranging inventory when he heard a commotion outside. Through the window, he saw a crowd gathering around a lone rider who had just dismounted in front of the saloon. The man was young, maybe 25, with the lean build and confident bearing of a professional gunfighter. His clothes were expensive, his guns well-maintained, and he carried himself with the swagger of someone looking to make a reputation. Samuel sighed and continued his work, but he wasn't surprised when Tommy Fletcher burst through the door a few minutes later. "Mr. Hayes, there's a man here asking for you. Says his name is Johnny Ringo, and he wants to test his speed against Lightning Sam Hayes." Samuel set down his inventory sheets and looked at the excited young man. "Tommy, I want you to go home now. Tell your mother to keep you inside until this is over. But Mr. Hayes, I want to see." "Go home, Tommy. Now." The boy's face fell, but he obeyed, leaving Samuel alone with his thoughts. Johnny Ringo. Samuel had heard the name before. The young man had been making a reputation for himself down in Texas and New Mexico. challenging established gunfighters, and winning more often than not. He was fast, reckless, and hungry for fame. Exactly the kind of trouble Samuel had been hoping to avoid. Samuel strapped on his gun belt and walked outside. The crowd on the street had grown larger, with people positioning themselves behind cover where they could watch the confrontation safely. Johnny Ringo stood in the center of the street, hands on his hips, looking every inch the confident young gun. "You Lightning Sam Hayes?" Ringo called out when he saw Samuel emerge from the store. "I am." Ringo's smile was cold and eager. "Been looking for you for 3 years. Heard you were dead, but word travels fast about what happened here the other day. I rode 200 miles to face the famous Lightning Sam." Samuel walked slowly into the street, stopping about 20 feet away from the younger man. "I'm not looking for trouble, son. Why don't you get back on your horse and ride on?" "Can't do that," Ringo replied, shaking his head. "See, I got a reputation to build, and beating Lightning Sam Hayes would put me on the map in a big way. Make me famous from here to California." "Fame's not all it's cracked up to be," Samuel said quietly. "Take my advice and find another line of work." Ringo laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Advice from the great Lightning Sam. I'll treasure that right up until I put a bullet in you." Samuel could see the hunger in the young man's eyes, the desperate need to prove himself that drove so many young gunfighters to early graves. He had been like that once before he learned that every reputation was built on a foundation of dead men and shattered lives. "Last chance," Samuel offered. "Walk away and we'll both live to see another day." "I didn't ride 200 miles to walk away," Ringo snarled, his hand moving to hover near his gun. "Draw when you're ready." The familiar coldness settled over Samuel as he prepared for what seemed inevitable. He had hoped never to face another young gun eager to make his name, but here he was again, forced into a situation he desperately wanted to avoid. "You sure about this, son?" Samuel asked one final time. Ringo's only answer was to spread his feet slightly and let his hand drift closer to his weapon. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the explosion of violence that would determine which man walked away. Samuel's draw was just as lightning fast as it had been 3 days earlier, but this time he made a conscious choice. Instead of aiming for center mass, he placed his shot carefully, the bullet shattering Ringo's gun hand before the younger man could clear leather. Ringo screamed and fell to his knees, clutching his wounded hand as blood seeped between his fingers. The crowd gasped in amazement. Samuel had been fast enough to kill Ringo easily, but he had chosen mercy instead. He walked over to where the wounded gunfighter knelt in the dirt, looking down at him with something approaching pity. "You're fast, boy, but not fast enough," Samuel said. "Count yourself lucky I didn't kill you. Now get yourself to the doctor, then get out of town and find a different way to make a living." Ringo looked up at him with pain and rage in his eyes. "This ain't over, Hayes. I'll heal up and I'll come back for you." "No, you won't," Samuel said with quiet certainty. "Because now you know the truth. You're not fast enough to beat me, and you're not fool enough to try again. Deep down, you're grateful to be alive, even if your pride won't let you admit it." Doc Morrison hurried over to tend to Ringo's wounded hand, while several townsmen helped the defeated gunfighter to his feet. As they led him away toward the doctor's office, Samuel noticed that many of the onlookers were looking at him with something approaching awe. He had shown mercy when he could have killed, demonstrating a control and wisdom that went beyond mere speed with a gun. But Samuel took no satisfaction in their admiration. Each gunfight, even one that ended without death, added another layer to his legend and made it that much harder to find the peace he sought. He holstered his gun and turned to walk back to his store, but a voice stopped him. "Samuel." He turned to see Sarah Mitchell standing at the edge of the crowd. For the first time since the confrontation with the Dalton gang, she was looking directly at him. Her face showed a mixture of emotions he couldn't quite read. "Miss Mitchell," he said carefully. She walked toward him, ignoring the stares of the other townspeople. When she reached him, she spoke quietly, her words meant for his ears alone. "I've been thinking about what happened the other day," she said, "about who you really are and what you did for this town." Samuel waited, unsure what to expect. "I was frightened," she continued. "Not of you, but of the violence. I've lived a sheltered life, and seeing men die, even bad men, was shocking to me." "I understand," Samuel said. "Violence is never easy to witness," Sarah shook her head. "But I was wrong to pull away from you. You didn't choose that fight. Those men came here to hurt innocent people, and you stopped them. Just now you could have killed that young man, but you chose mercy instead. That tells me more about your character than the stories people whisper about your past." Samuel felt a weight lifting from his chest. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. The man I used to be, Lightning Sam Hayes, he's not gone completely. As long as people know who I am, there will be others like Johnny Ringo. Young guns looking to make their reputation, old enemies settling scores. The quiet life I tried to build here may be over." She looked at him steadily. "Then maybe it's time to build a different kind of life. One where Samuel Hayes the shopkeeper and Lightning Sam the protector can exist together." Before Samuel could respond, Mayor Carlson approached with several other prominent townsmen. Their faces showed a mixture of gratitude and determination that Samuel recognized immediately. "Samuel," the mayor began, "we've been talking, and we have a proposition for you." Samuel looked at the group of townsmen, noting the serious expressions on their faces. Whatever they had discussed, it was clearly important to them. Sarah stepped back slightly but remained close enough to hear the conversation. "What kind of proposition?" Samuel asked. Mayor Carlson cleared his throat. "Well, as you know, we haven't had a proper sheriff since Thompson left for Dodge City 6 months ago. The territorial government keeps promising to send someone, but you know how slow bureaucrats can be." Samuel had a feeling he knew where this was heading, but he waited for the mayor to continue. "The town council met this morning," Carlson went on, "and we voted unanimously to offer you the position of sheriff of Copper Ridge. The pay isn't much, but it comes with a house and the respect of the community. We know it might seem like we're asking you to go back to a life of violence," added Mr. Henderson from the bank. "But what happened with the Dalton gang and just now with that Ringo fellow shows us that violence is going to find you whether you're wearing a badge or not." Doc Morrison stepped forward. "At least as sheriff, you'd be fighting on the right side of the law, protecting people instead of just surviving." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, considering their offer. The idea had merit, but it also carried significant risks. "Being sheriff would make me an even bigger target," he pointed out. "Every outlaw and gunfighter in the territory would see me as a challenge." "Maybe at first," Mayor Carlson admitted. "But word would spread quickly that Copper Ridge has Lightning Sam Hayes as sheriff. Most outlaws would think twice about coming here. The ones foolish enough to try would learn what the Dalton gang learned. And you wouldn't be facing them alone," added Tom Wilson, who owned the livery stable. "The town would support you. We'd form a proper citizens' militia, train with weapons, help you keep the peace." Samuel glanced at Sarah, who was listening intently to the conversation. Her earlier words about building a different kind of life echoed in his mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe he could find a way to use his skills for something positive instead of simply trying to hide from his past. "There's something else," Mayor Carlson continued. "We sent a telegraph to the territorial capital yesterday. Told them about what happened here and recommended you for the sheriff position. We got a reply this morning." He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his vest pocket. "The territorial governor is not only willing to appoint you as sheriff, but he's offering a substantial salary increase and the backing of territorial law enforcement. Apparently, your reputation preceded you even there." Samuel took the telegram and read it quickly. The offer was indeed generous, more than he could make running his store. But more importantly, it represented a chance to channel his abilities toward protecting innocent people rather than simply reacting to threats. "I'll need time to think about this," Samuel said finally. "Of course," the mayor replied. "Take all the time you need. But Samuel, I hope you'll consider it seriously. This town needs you, and I think maybe you need this too." The crowd began to disperse, leaving Samuel alone with his thoughts. He walked slowly back toward his store, but Sarah fell into step beside him. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. "I think it's a big decision," Samuel replied. "Being sheriff means accepting that Lightning Sam Hayes will never really go away. It means living with the constant possibility of violence." They reached the front of his store and stopped. Sarah turned to face him, her expression serious but not afraid. "Samuel, can I tell you something I learned watching you today?" He nodded. "When that young man challenged you, you could have killed him easily. I saw how fast you drew, how precise your shot was. But you chose to wound him instead of kill him. That wasn't Lightning Sam Hayes making that choice. That was Samuel Hayes, the man who cares about his community and values life." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe the question isn't whether Lightning Sam will go away, but whether Samuel Hayes is strong enough to control him. To use those skills only when necessary and in service of something good." Samuel considered her words. She had a point. The gunfight with Ringo had shown him that he could exercise restraint, even in a life-or-death situation. Perhaps his legendary speed didn't have to be a curse if he used it responsibly. "There's another consideration," Samuel said slowly. "If I take this job, I'll be putting everyone around me at risk. That includes you if you're planning to stay in Copper Ridge." Sarah smiled for the first time since the confrontation with the Dalton gang. "I'm not going anywhere, Samuel Hayes. This town is my home now, and the people in it are my responsibility too. If you become sheriff, you'll be protecting all of us, including me. That's not a risk I'm worried about." That evening, Samuel sat alone in his store weighing his options. He could refuse the sheriff position and hope that his secret would gradually fade into legend again. But Johnny Ringo's challenge proved that hiding was no longer possible. His identity was known, and there would always be young guns looking to make their reputation by facing Lightning Sam Hayes. On the other hand, accepting the sheriff position meant embracing his past while using it for a greater good. It meant protecting not just Copper Ridge but potentially becoming a symbol of law and order throughout the territory. It was dangerous, but it also offered purpose and redemption. The next morning, Samuel walked to the mayor's office and knocked on the door. Mayor Carlson looked up from his desk hopefully when Samuel entered. "I'll take the job," Samuel said simply. The mayor's face broke into a wide grin. "Samuel, that's wonderful news. When can you start?" "Today if you need me to. But I have conditions." "Name them." Samuel sat down across from the mayor's desk. "First, I keep running my store. I'll need the income, and I want to maintain my connection to the community as a businessman, not just as a lawman." "Agreed." "Second, we do this right. I want proper training for any citizen militia. I want good communication with territorial law enforcement. And I want it understood that I'm the law in this town, not some gun for hire." Mayor Carlson nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. You'll have our full support." "Third," Samuel continued, "I want it known throughout the territory that Copper Ridge is under my protection, but also that I'm not looking for trouble. Men who come here peacefully will be treated fairly. Men who come looking for a fight will get more than they bargained for. I'll see that the word gets out," the mayor promised. Samuel stood and extended his hand. "Then I guess Copper Ridge has itself a new sheriff." As they shook hands, Samuel felt a sense of rightness that he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since he had tried to leave his past behind, he was choosing to face it head-on. Lightning Sam Hayes would never disappear completely, but maybe, with the right purpose and the right community behind him, Samuel Hayes could find a way to make peace with both sides of his nature. Outside the mayor's office, he could see Sarah Mitchell walking her students to the schoolhouse, the morning sun catching the gold in her hair. She looked up and saw him through the window, offering him a smile that held promise and hope. Samuel smiled back, feeling for the first time that his future in Copper Ridge might be brighter than his past. The quiet shopkeeper had become a lawman, and Lightning Sam Hayes had found his redemption in service to the community that had given him a second chance. The legend would continue, but now it would be written in the defense of innocent people, rather than in the pursuit of fame and fortune. Samuel Hayes pinned the sheriff's badge to his vest and stepped out into the morning sun, ready to begin the next chapter of his extraordinary life.